Good morning all and welcome. We will begin the program in a few minutes. So if you can find yourself a place to sit or stand, please do so. Okay, all, welcome to the EE Solutions Summit. It's such a pleasure to see so many people here. I'm Anne Høyer Simonsen from the Confederation of Danish Industries, and I'll just be here throughout the program to introduce the different stages we are going through today. First of all, I would like to introduce the CEO of Danish Industries, Lars Sandal Sørensen, to give you all the welcome to this event.
Good morning, everyone. Are you okay? It looks like you're okay, and if not, we will take care of that as well, I'm sure. Great to see you here, honored guests, honored partners, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the EE Solutions Summit. I think these halls of knowledge are quite unique. You will have a number of companies presenting today in a very, very concrete and relevant manner, showing examples of what can be done, how solutions are made in very practical terms as well. And the knowledge that you represent in this room is quite amazing. And amazing in the sense that it's the world is gathering here in Sønderborg to look at what we can actually do to further develop our energy efficiency solutions. So I'm really happy to see that so many of you have found their way here. Yesterday it was announced that Sønderborg and Denmark is the EE capital of the world. That is absolutely big words. A lot of things are happening in the world, but certainly we are extremely committed to be a very, very important part of the solution. When the IEA conference was announced almost a year ago, we started planning, as you would understand, this summit. Most of the world was in the shadow of Corona. In Europe, at least, this gave us a way to focus on like a green restart of the economy, which has taken place. And now the world is certainly changing again, and especially here in Europe. The political tectonic plates of the Western world are absolutely shifting. We are all aware of that, and almost not least when it comes to energy policy. And the world is, in that sense, also amid a climate crisis, and the Western world is also facing a potential energy supply crisis. This is, of course, for all of us, extremely serious. While this is a bleak backdrop, it also presents us with an opportunity to really act. And the answer to both challenges is and must be an accelerated focus on a green transition and an intelligent and efficient energy use, which we are not seeing in the world today to a large enough extent. Energy is vital to the world, we all know that. A connected world, a prosperous world with a robust market and competitive economy. And green energy is a valuable resource and becoming more and more valuable. In a green future, energy consumption, as we all know it, should be viewed in a holistic perspective, in our opinion, across sectors, and must be prioritized where there is added most value. With its 7th annual global conference on energy efficiency that we are in the middle of now, taking place here, the IEA focuses on the cost of inaction, meaning what will it cost to meet the Paris Agreement climate targets without a proper investment in energy efficiency initiatives. In our country here in Denmark, we have a long tradition of energy efficiency for many reasons. Danish companies are among the most energy efficient in the world, but there are still significant potential to be realized further. A recent analysis finds that by harnessing the EE potentials, the cost of meeting Denmark's national climate target by 2030 will be noticeably lower, almost halved, meaning than an estimated total saving of $2 billion. But Denmark is a small country. We contribute only 0.1% of the global CO2 emissions as such. So even if we shut down all activity in Denmark, it will impact global climate change relatively microscopically. However, if we can inspire other countries to use better EE solutions that we are developing here, our potential impact is much, much larger, and that is certainly our ambition in partnerships with you. No single country holds the key to an energy efficient future, so the ultimate purpose of this summit obviously is to share experience on how best to access energy efficiency, no matter the region, sector or size of cost of efficient potentials. Our experience so far have certainly been, and still is, and I see it everywhere I look in all these examples here, and just crossing the water on the hybrid ferry here, or a vessel, it all lies in different types of partnerships. It can be private-to-private partnerships, it can be public-to-private partnerships, but the partnerships are, and the thinking out of the box types of partnerships are often the key to solutions. And we believe that really strong public-private partnerships are absolutely key to finding the ways going forward. Energy efficiency can be many things, and everything counts, both in terms of energy and capital saved. Today we will address some of the key sectors for an energy efficient future: transport, buildings, industry, and of course the overarching focus on sector integration, which is and bears an important part of the solution as well, coming back to partnerships and working across different sectors. In transport, for example, emissions have grown faster than those of any other sector over the past 50 years, as demand for transport will continue to grow massively. In the coming decades, there is a global need to curb emissions and use the right energy efficiency solutions. And we see examples of solutions here today, and we'll hear more about it in our sessions around in the different forums. In the industry and residential sectors, respectively, technical potentials for energy savings are as high as 24 to 32% within the EU alone, according to a study from the EU Commission. And as you know, are very well aware, huge investments are already being made there, but huge further investments and beneficial investments certainly lies ahead. As energy prices rises, as we all see, the economic potential is closing in on technical potentials, and energy efficiency is gaining rightful weight and momentum. And for some reason, it seems we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that all decision makers really realize how important and how fundamental energy efficiency is, and the opportunity it represents. And the good thing about that is it's much, much faster than many other projects. It can happen here and now if you're able to really introduce the right solutions quickly. So the cost of inaction should be considered as a wake-up call, in our opinion, and we ask that governments and the political decision makers, both here in this country and around the globe, take notice of that fact, that a green transition does not prioritize energy efficiency, is a green transition that is unnecessary, expensive, and therefore will be harder to achieve. So national strategies for energy efficiency should be ambitious and should be a key part in reaching the Paris Agreement climate targets. The best and most effective and probably only way to reach global climate goals and eventually climate neutrality is a decision makers, and when decision makers, businesses and civil society pulls together, as I mentioned before. And from my experience, public-private partnerships holds the key to unleash this great potential within energy efficiency. And we here in our country would like to be an example of how to do that. And we believe that our political decision makers, as well as the private sector and public sector, are eager to find partnerships also in new ways of creating results. Sharing the best practices within EE is important and has gained an increased focus of business organization, both here in Europe and also elsewhere. I just spent most of last week in a European setting where we were discussing how to best also in Europe further enhance the energy efficient agenda. In Denmark, we have organized 14 climate partnerships in different sectors. All main sectors of the economy contribute with sector-specific analysis and also proposals, very concrete proposals and actions on reaching Denmark's overall climate target of 70% CO2 reductions by 2030, relative to 1990 figures. The initial analysis were conducted in 2020, involving very committed industry teams in all the sectors, all the 14 sectors, including manufacturing industry, buildings, transport, energy, etc. The recommendations are now in the implementation phase in a real specific and concrete manner with ambitious goals. It is a demanding task. It is super complicated technically, but also legislation-wise. But however, our monitoring so far shows real progress, and we believe it is possible to get there by 2030. Businesses are ready to deliver, and investors are ready to invest. In Confederation of Danish Industries, where we take a very active role and a very ambitious role in being part of this solution, our philosophy is that the world we pass on to our children and grandchildren should be greener, richer and better than it is today. That in itself is a huge task. To get there, it is important that we all, in our opinion, both public and private, are pulling in the same overall direction and putting all differences aside and focus on what we can actually create together. Therefore, I'm happy to see that so many representatives from the public and private sectors are here today. And ministers, thank you for also participating. We really appreciate that. And I would like to thank all our partners for joining us and for you to be here and exchange your experience and ideas and see what we can actually create together. Thanks for the companies that have made this possible, and to the speakers of today, and for taking time to share your knowledge with us. I look forward very much to an inspiring day with new input and meaningful discussions. And I think that the panel here, you will hear shortly, will give us a lot of insight, and we will be able to break out into separate sections afterwards and focus on your specific interests. I hope you'll get the most out of it so we can really move the dial on energy efficiency here, but also globally. We would like to partner up with you in that effort and look forward to the day with you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Lars, and a warm welcome. I hope you can all feel it. Our next speaker is Brian Motherway, heading energy efficiency at the EIA, and a very important person in this context. The floor is yours, Brian.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Lars, and thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. We have received an extremely warm welcome here in Sunderberg, and it's been a privilege for us in the IEA to work with our Danish partners, the ministries and Danfoss and the Confederation and all of the other companies and stakeholders, to be part of the privilege of bringing so many people from every corner of the world to Sunderberg for these days, to focus very much on solutions, which is what we're talking about today. I do want to stress that just before I joined you, we were loading up buses across the river where we were sending ministers and senior officials from Mexico and Argentina and Australia and New Zealand and Senegal and many other countries to different sites in the region to see what's really happening on the ground and how energy efficiency can really work in practice. So I think we should just pause for a moment and be proud of that, and be proud that this region is the center of the world, and it was christened yesterday the global capital of energy efficiency. So I think we should give Sunderberg a round of applause, maybe. And I think it's great that the theme here is solutions. Some of the discussions we had yesterday at the conference across the water, we called the first session the value of early action on energy efficiency, and we launched some new research that Lars mentioned that actually puts numbers on this. And if you didn't see it, we said, for example, that if we really push on energy efficiency in this decade, by the end of this decade, by 2030, the world could be using less energy to the equivalent of the entire energy use of China. That's the prize available if we really push on energy efficiency in the next 8 years. And I think that has woken some people up to realize that the difference between focusing on energy efficiency and not focusing on energy efficiency. And I have to say, while we settled on the title, The Value of Early Action on Energy Efficiency, Lars used a phrase that we thought we might use as well, which is the cost of inaction. We were trying to decide which is more motivating. We decided to be a bit more positive framing, but I think you have to remember that the cost of inaction is that the world will be using extra energy, 95 exajoules, which is the equivalent of China's energy use. And in fact, householders will be spending every single year more than $650 billion on energy that they don't need to spend if we don't focus on energy efficiency in this decade. And that's why in our pathway to net zero energy systems by 2050, 2020 to 2030 is really the decade of energy efficiency. When you look at all the other technologies, renewables and hydrogen and CCUS and many different technologies, in fact, energy efficiency is the single biggest contributor to emissions abatement in this decade, according to our analysis, and that's why we want to focus on it. But of course, as we all know here, that's fine to say. Everybody here thinks energy efficiency is a good thing, and I think everybody over there thinks energy efficiency is a good thing as well. But it can be hard. It can be hard to visualize, and it can be hard to deliver. And that's why it's really great that we're seeing so many use of words like solutions and action here, because we're actually showing people how it works and what success looks like, both in terms of the prize you get, but also in terms of how you do it. Because I must say, when we work with governments around the world on energy efficiency, the two most common things they say to me is that it's a bit abstract, you can't see it. A minister likes to cut a ribbon on a wind farm, but it's hard to cut a ribbon on some energy that hasn't been used. And the second they say is, it's hard. It's hard work. If an energy minister wants to push renewable energy, he can sign a law that says, let's have more renewable energy. If he wants to save energy, he has to talk to his colleagues in housing, in the industry ministry, in the transport ministry. So it really requires a whole of government response and a lot of hard work to deliver energy efficiency. Now, in the past, I'm not sure that energy efficiency, even I will admit, was exciting enough to really prompt that whole of government push on energy efficiency. But two things have happened in the last couple of years. First of all, with the global focus on net zero, so many world leaders in the last 18, 24 months have committed their countries to net zero targets by 2050 or thereabouts. 2 years ago, there was literally no net zero binding targets in the world. Now more than 3/4 of global emissions are covered by a net zero target and by a firm ambition stated by leaders. So I think that's going to be a kind of glue that really forces whole of government action. And I have to say to you, a lot of senior officials in ministries, the day after their world leader said we are going to double energy efficiency and we're going to go faster towards net zero, I'm the first to get the panicked phone call saying, how on earth are we going to achieve this? What policies can we look at to accelerate progress on energy efficiency? And the second thing, putting it a little more negatively, but with a silver lining, is the last few months, particularly here in Europe, have reminded us of the cost of inaction on energy efficiency, both in terms of just simple resilience, in terms of getting the energy we need, but also the cost to consumers. And consumers at home, in industry, are really suffering now, and I think we really need to realize that and focus on that with bills that are at an all-time high. And governments want to act. We've been delighted to be working directly with the European Commission and member states on 10-point plans that look about how we can reduce our dependence on Russian gas, how we can reduce our dependence on Russian oil, but also how we can engage citizens in this project in terms of the things that governments can do, but also citizens can do. And of course, it's all about the demand side. There are conversations to be had about LNG, about where we get our oil, about storage, but really there's a new, renewed focus on the demand side in terms of becoming more efficient, the simple savings we can all make in our daily lives, the structural changes we can make if we insulate more buildings, if we accelerate the shift to electric vehicles, if we think about the infrastructure we are building now, and we choose between locking in inefficiency, higher costs and higher emissions, or we take this opportunity to lock in efficiency, lower costs and lower emissions. And that's why this conference is so timely, and I think that's why we're delighted that so many people have come to join this conference from more than 60 countries around the world in every corner are here this week to talk about energy efficiency, and that makes me feel a little proud because it's not always easy to get people excited about energy efficiency. But everybody here has helped make that happen, because this is where the rubber hits the road, as they say, where we get tangible, we talk about solutions, and we really show how it makes it happen. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm afraid I can't stay for the discussion because I have to rush back and talk to those ministers again and make sure they're taking home all the lessons from their visits here. But I really wish you well for the day, and I thank you very much for your invitation to join you. Thank you.
Thank you, and greetings from here right to the ministers. It's perfect, Brian Motherway. Next up is our panel on conversation on public-private partnerships driving decarbonization through energy efficiency. And our moderator is Connie Hedegaard, the chairman of the board of Concito, the green think tank in Denmark, and not least former EU Commissioner for Climate Action. So please, Connie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'll try to move out here. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to Anna and to the Confederation of Danish Industries. We have a panel here this morning who will be very much focusing on partnerships. As we just heard in the two welcoming remarks here, there's so many things that needs to get in order to enhance the focus on energy efficiency and the deliverables of that, targets and tariffs and incentives and regulations and standards and data and digitalization and information. All that is needed in order to harvest the potential. However, if we are to move up to scaled up action, then we also very much need to have scaled up cooperation between the public and the private sector, between the regulators, those determining the framework conditions, and those possessing and developing, having the solutions and the investments. And that is what this panel is all about. And I would like to invite here to stage our panelists. Please come up and take your not too comfortable seat. Be careful not to tumble around up here. And I should say, just as a practical thing, that this conversation is being streamed to the Confederation of Danish Industries and Danfoss's YouTube channels. But welcome up here to our panel. Yes, it's somewhat crowded. You can be there, Jürgen. Here next to me, we have Jürgen.
Monica.
Jürgen Fischer, President, Danfoss Climate Solutions, and Jürgen has been with Danfoss since 2008, really working on the different topics here. Then we have Christian Heine, who is CEO, Hamburger Energiewerke GmbH. And Christian is a member of the board of the National Association of Municipal Utilities in Germany, and you have worked with energy and finance for quite a substantial time in the Hamburg region. Yep. Next to you is Monica Frassoni, President, the European Alliance to Save Energy. And Monica also has a background, 10 years in the European Parliament with the Green Party, also at that time working with many of the topics here. And next to her, Niels Fuglsang, the Danish member of the European Parliament, actually the rapporteur on the Energy Efficiency Directive. So quite crucial in the coming weeks here, where I understand that the hope is that something can be landed. And then also welcome up here to Patty Monahan, Commissioner for the California Energy Commission. And in the commission there are several members, but Patty is the lead commissioner for transport, industrial decarbonization and hydrogen. So this is our panel. And I would like to ask you to start, Jürgen Fischer, you first, to try to give just a very brief introduction to the best case, the best example you have come across in your work when it comes to public-private partnerships. We can come to all the obstacles later maybe and some of the barriers, but the best example you can come up with.
Of course, the best example is Project Zero. What else could it be here? It's not a classical public-private partnership as we may know it, that public and private build a joint highway or so, but it is a different type of public-private partnership where many people have been cooperating. And typically it starts with having a plan. And in order to have a plan, you need to analyze. And that also happened back in 2006-07, a little bit before I joined Danfoss. So we invested in some consultancy, I have to say, from outside to actually evaluate where are there energy input and energy output in this region. And that could be electricity, that could also be thermal energy. And that is a starting point if you want to change an energy system, in my opinion, that you know who is pulling and needing what energy, when, in the future, and who can provide energy. And that happened back in 2006-07, and then a master plan has been developed. And this master plan has been developed all together with all the stakeholders, public, private, industry, society, everybody was part of that master plan. And typically when you then do a master plan in politics or elsewhere, there's a next election, nothing happens afterwards. No, just kidding. But it's important that you follow up on a master plan.
Depends who you vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And whoever made that plan and the other one makes another plan. But here it was very clear. We made a master plan and then everybody was following up on the master plan. In Danfoss we have a business system and we talk a lot about plan, do, check, act. Meaning we plan something, we do it, we check, is it realistic, is it successful, and then we change it again. And this also happened here permanently over time. And then you have to turn it in action. And I think I can give you one other example. It's far away, it's in China. in a city named Anshan in the northern part of China, where we have a relatively big district heating factory, where we, together with the government, and Anton is sitting here, Anton Koller, who is responsible for that business, with the government, local government, took care that they are not using oil and coal for their heating systems, but use the excess heat from the local steel factory. And it was a 10-year project, and at the end, you can say, we improved the air quality of that city substantially, but it was also a different kind of partnership where we had a stake, we had a factory, and we worked together with that local government. But the best example, and I think the most holistic example, is definitely here. Yes, I'm aware it's maybe not so easy to do that in Hamburg, but we could also do something like that in Hamburg, but the starting point would be really to measure where is energy need and where is energy, excess energy available.
Okay, let's hear how difficult or not it is in Hamburg. Christian Heine, your best example, what would that be?
Yeah, many thanks, Connie. Well, as we all know, we discussed energy efficiency so much the past 2 days. The best kilowatt hour is, of course, the one that's not produced and not consumed. But if it is produced, then, of course, I think we have an obligation to reuse it, to recycle it several times over. So in Hamburg, we have identified an potential of industrial waste heat of about 350 megawatt in the Hamburg harbor area, because Hamburg is not just a big city, it's also a huge industrial site. So there's a huge potential. So, and if you think about it, this of course leads to the question of sector coupling, sector integration, how to utilize this industrial waste heat, and that only goes with cooperation. And we have several examples of this. For example, if you want to kind of utilize the industrial waste heat of ArcelorMittal, they're producing steel in Hamburg, then of course you need to have contracts, you need to have projects with them. We have Trimet, an aluminum producer, we have a contract with them to collect their industrial waste heat. Aurub is a copper producer in Hamburg. So there are several examples where cooperation is needed to actually utilize the waste heat and to feed it into the district heating system. There are also kind of several examples where you have public partnerships that are also very important. We have projects with our water company, for example, to utilize the waste heat that is produced in sewage incineration plants. We are going to install a heat pump, a large heat pump, to install it in the water treatment plant. And the best example I have is one that we are doing together with Shell and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Together we are going to build a 100 megawatt electrolyzer in Hamburg in order to produce hydrogen, which is something that we extremely need because we have a consumption of 2 billion cubic meter of natural gas in Hamburg. That's about 2/3 of the whole consumption of Denmark in Hamburg alone. And it's, of course, a huge challenge to decarbonize this consumption of natural gas. As you can imagine, it's usually a factor 3 to 4, right? So you need between 6 to 8 billion cubic meter hydrogen. And taking away electrification and also energy efficiency, I think in our estimate, we still need 4 billion cubic meter of hydrogen. And I hope we're going to have a very close cooperation also with Denmark. You know, there are some very exciting prospects here too, to produce hydrogen and to export it to Germany, where it's well needed.
Thank you very much, Christian Heine. Monica Fasona, you have been working with this also for a long time. The best example of public-private partnership, real partnership that you can come across?
Yes, thank you, Connie. And I'm very glad to be here in this extremely beautiful place, by the way. Well, first of all, the European Alliance to Save Energy is not producing products, but I think that from our point of view, the best example of public-private cooperation is actually the work that companies, very important companies, and among them is certainly one of the founding members of the European Alliance to Save Energy, which is Danfoss, but also others, Siemens, Schneider, etc., is exactly to create a relation together with civil society organizations and really create a relationship with Commission, Parliament, etc. And this in Brussels, at our time in the institutions, was not that much the case. The fact of being able to work together and to present not only the business case, but the business case with the civil society and society at large, issues related to energy efficiency, which has always been a little bit of a Cinderella in the energy discussion. It's not by accident that till now the 20% target of increase of energy efficiency has not been reached in the European Union, and therefore there is a lot of things to be done in order to improve the legislation, the legislative framework. And I also think that there is a role for the private sector to help each other. I was listening to what Lars was saying about how ambitious the industrial sector is here in Denmark on energy efficiency, but not only. And I think that there is a lot to be done also to try to convince other industrial sectors in other countries, notably at the level of the European Union. Today, for example, in my own country, there is an uproar because of this vote that happened yesterday in the European Parliament on the automotive sector and also on ETS. And there is a lot of convincing to be done. And I think that this private partnership can also work with other industrial sectors. So the best example, if I may make a very concrete one that happened just, if not a few days, a few weeks ago, is the work that we did together with our companies and the NGOs which are involved in order to make sure that in the Repower EU action plan of the European Union, energy efficiency was put at the same level of renewables with a legal proposal. 1 week before, that was not the case, and that was a great example of cooperation, also in legislation, between private and public.
Niels Fuglsang, one thing is sort of normal cooperation between the politicians and those wanting this or that, or being able to do this and that. But sort of the real, sort of the partnership where you go in together and drive something. What is your best example?
Well, I think that the examples on sector coupling that Christian touched upon are extremely important. I think a lot of the efforts that we will see on energy efficiency will really come from partnerships where we have companies, industries producing their products and in that process producing excess heat that we need to use. We need to use that heat in our district heating systems to benefit consumers and citizens. And we cannot do that without strong public and private partnerships by definition, because many of the heating sector is often a public enterprise, and the companies need to work together with the public sector here. So I think that will be some of the most important things, and I'm especially thinking about the data centers that we are seeing popping up so many places in our own country here, Denmark, but all over Europe, of course. Data centers from Google and Apple. If we look at the estimates, they will take up more and more of our electricity consumption. And of course, we need to make sure, and that's what I'm working for in this new legislation, that we have some mandatory requirements that these data centers should be coupled to the heating sector, to the heating net. And that, I think, requires strong cooperation between the public and the private sector. We're also taking inspiration from the climate partnerships that Lars Sandahl mentioned earlier, the climate partnerships that we have in Denmark, where private and public actors come together to discuss solutions. In the Energy Efficiency Directive, we are discussing now to make some energy efficiency partnerships on a European level, also to share the experience that we have among the private actors. So I think a lot of cooperation is obviously needed.
Thank you very much. We could come back maybe to what you're negotiating on the Energy Efficiency Directive. But Patty, now we have listened to sort of 4 European perspectives maybe, but seen from an American perspective or Californian perspective, is it any different? What would be your example to promote or to underline here on public-private partnership?
Well, I'm going to be speaking specifically to California. We consider ourselves a nation state, the 5th largest economy in the world. So I try to separate what US politics are from where California is in terms of our commitment to climate action and to really ambitious targets. We have a target of reaching climate neutrality by 2045, a 100% clean grid by 2045, and to zero out emissions from the transportation system over the next 15 to 25 years. And when I think about energy efficiency, I'm looking at it from a full life cycle. You know, the kilowatt hour saved, or whatever energy unit you want to use. That's how we are looking at energy efficiency. So from our perspective as a state, transitioning fuels that are more efficient, for example, heat pumps, so transitioning from natural gas to electric is a more efficient solution. Transitioning from internal combustion vehicles to efficient electric vehicles, that's an efficiency solution. So I think we need to look at efficiency holistically and not have these silos between fuels, but really think about it from an energy system perspective. And we are deeply invested in all elements of a public-private partnership in order to reach our decarbonization goals. So we have funding for research and development, we have funding for deployment, and we require that industry have skin in the game for all of the grants that we give out. So every grant that we give out is a public-private partnership. We have, in a base year, we have about $250 million, a little over $250 million per year for these research, development, deployment projects. This year, the governor is proposing a massive scale-up of $4 billion, so 8 times more. And the specific example I'm going to give is, I'm going to focus on the transportation side. That's $2 billion of the $4 billion that the governor is proposing is to build out zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. So what we're seeing is this need for a massive scale-up. We need to do in 10 years what took the internal combustion industry 100 years to do, which is build out a robust refueling infrastructure for zero-emission vehicles. And we are requiring, as we build out this infrastructure, especially with attention to communities that otherwise would be left behind, we're requiring industry to partner in those investments. And what we're seeing is, as the industry scales up and they start becoming more self-sufficient, we're going to reduce the public share of that investment.
Thank you very much. Now, I don't know what you think in the audience, but somehow you all make it, to me, you make it sound very easy. This is something you just do, public-private partnership. And then I guess that many of us have this experience that in reality, it's also not that easy. Christian Heine, for instance, when it comes to, you mentioned waste, heat, and sector coupling and things like that. And we know that huge investments are needed in the years to come. And for instance, now in Europe, where also renewables and the crisis and many things will sort of take investments. So would this public-private partnership also mean that when it comes to the financing of things, that new models need to be identified? Or do you already have good examples there?
Oh, it's a very good question, actually, because most of the private companies that are that provide the access heat to us usually do have to do investments on their own sites, right? In the production process, they have to kind of install heat exchangers or heat pumps or other kind of technology. And when it comes to a final investment decision on the part of our private partners, then often they say they don't have the business case, right? Because they kind of the depreciation that they take on when they kind of model their business model is 3 to 5 years, right? Otherwise, they're not going to invest. So we actually developed a model whereas we actually do the investment on their side. So they run the operation, they run the heat exchanger, they kind of do everything that's kind of related to maintenance and to operation of the heat exchanger, but we actually take the investment. Why do we do this? Because we can calculate differently. I calculate on a very long-term basis. I have a totally different business model. So, and I take the risk that they would kind of relocate and kind of change their operation from Hamburg to elsewhere. That's the risk I have to take. But that's the only model that makes sure that I can actually collect this excess heat. That's the model that we're running at the moment, because otherwise it's extremely difficult for a company like Arcelor or Trimit or Rubis to actually take the investment decision on their own.
Yeah. Let me say to the panel, if you want to comment on what each other have said, please let me know. Jürgen, that risk, the assumption of risk or the culture towards risk could be different between the public and the private sector. Can you sort of identify with that?
I fully understand what you are saying. I mean, I have been approached so many times by both sides, by the producer of excess energy. Hey, we have that, but we do not want to invest because we don't know what we're going to get in the future. Energy price, right? This is going up and down. That could also be an idea to secure that long term. Then the business case may be a bit better. And the other side saying, I'm just a district heating company. I don't want to invest in a heat pump. If they deliver excess heat to me, they should guarantee it is permanently at 55 degrees and not 38 and sometimes 65. So nobody wants to invest in the interface. And I have already thought about a business model using money from outside to enable a kind of investment model where people invest in the interface. But of course, then you would have to take care that they get 1 cent from the excess energy or whatever. But there is so much money out there. And I've been talking to big investment funds who have said, that would be a good idea, but we want to invest not less than 1 billion. And then you're starting, okay, how do I get now 10,000 heat pumps in one shot? And you are immediately in this, it's too small for the big investors. And I think if we work around this, and I think the Californian way is fantastic, that you just give a grant to somebody, they get 40%, 30, 50. You also did that in energy storage a couple of years ago, in the beginning of wind energy and solar energy, and that drives so much speed and activity level. And it's such a simple model, right? What you're doing, you give money, but this does, for whatever reason, not work in Europe.
Yeah.
I don't know
so
why.
what needs to be done?
In my opinion, it would be very easy just to give grants to investment in this infrastructure without a lot of complicated, 10,000 pages to fill in, tenders.
So you say, just give us the money or what?
Yeah, find an easier way to invest in infrastructure we all need together. That's what I'm saying. We have to find an easier way.
Yeah.
A faster
You sit
way.
on the other side of the table. How does that sound?
Well, getting funding is, of course, always a very good solution, but I think there's another way. You can actually take the investment, but you pay extremely low price for the excess heat that you get. And it actually replaces, it's much cheaper than to produce it in a conventional way. I mean, if you calculate it, you would usually think that the integration of waste heat is quite an advantage for a district heating operator. I think so, because I pay very little for the heat I get. What is really important, though, is that you need to think about storage. That's really, because industrial processes run throughout the year, 8,760 hours a year. So you need to basically store the exit heat in the summer period to utilize it in the heating period. And for this, you need aquifer storage. That's what we are going to do in Hamburg, because we can't do surface storages, right? You need whatever, 500,000 liters of hot water. And for this, you just need geothermal aquifer storages. And
Niels Fuglsang?
Yes, well, I would like to comment on what Jürgen said about insecurity concerning investments. I think that's from my point of view as a legislator and speaking with industry, I think that seems like a main problem. We have a huge investment gap. We all know that in terms of there are lots of projects we should do on energy efficiency which is not being done because the money is not being invested. From my point of view, there are two main obstacles towards having. I would like a legislation with some high targets, some high binding targets for how much we should improve energy efficiency. And I'd also like some binding measures for, let's say, energy audits, utilization of waste heat and so on. The two main obstacles, the two main counter-arguments that I meet is, one, what I would call an overestimation of the rationality of companies and people in general. People saying, you know, you don't even need to legislate on this because if it's so rational to do, companies will do it anyway. So we actually don't need legislation because it's a good, if there is a good economic case, companies will do it. And I think I also learned about rational choice theory at university, but it occurred to me that it doesn't really hold in reality. There are so many rational investments that are not being made, maybe because of lack of information, maybe because we are not aware about the potentials. So I think we need some, energy audits is a mandatory energy audits for companies of a certain size is one place to start. The second obstacles I would point at concerns the public sector, and it's the ministries of finance that look at these investments as not always investments, but just expenses. Because, of course, if you want to improve energy efficiency, you need to spend some money to make the projects. But we need to look at those projects in the long term and say these are actually investments. They will pay themselves back in many cases in a very short time span. But I think the ministries of finance often they will be a huge discussion partner. Let's put it like that, because they will see it as expenses often, and that's the ones we have to convince. I think that these are actually investments that we need to make.
It's interesting, like how policymakers, when they speak about the finance ministry, gets a bit sort of cautious with the words.
It's always the same problem.
Good. Patty Moynihan, yeah.
Well, I want to make 2 points. One is I think there is an opportunity to make it more transparent what building energy use actually is and to create competition. We're looking at ways to do that in California. So, I mean, maybe the US, we're very competitive against each other. So, the more you can identify sort of how much energy use is being used by buildings, comparable buildings, and create sort of a race to the top, we're looking at those kinds of transparency opportunities. But I also want to emphasize that there's a deployment aspect that I think much of the panel has been talking about, but this research and development is also really critical. We need new technologies, and we are looking at ways to foster startups and through the valley of death to commercialization. And I think that's a really critical aspect to energy efficiency, that we know we don't have all the technologies that we need to reach our decarbonization goals. And ensuring that startup companies have sufficient support to really test out whether their technologies can flourish in the marketplace is important. I think not just in California, but globally, we need to be thinking more about research and development.
But it may be interesting to hear you elaborate a bit on how you're doing that, because now, for instance, Jürgen Fischer referred to the fact that sometimes business feel that it's a bit bureaucratic, the systems we have built in Europe. How do you sort of, when you decide these 2 or 4 to 4 billions and the $250 million that you are granting out there, so how smooth is it? What is the time frame within which someone trying to avoid the valley of death and then want to have the support from the state? How are you doing it?
Well, so we have innovation centers in California that support startup companies to apply for our grants. They handhold them through our grant process and really provide this ecosystem of support with other companies that are in the same, that are working towards the same end game. And our grants are structured to provide sort of small grants at the beginning and to allow, as we see progress, to provide additional funds to these grantees. I mean, you'd have to ask the grantees about their experience, of course, I'm biased. But what we have heard from our grantee network is that it has been really critical to their success to have this seed funding and then to have continued support as they're able to demonstrate success.
Yeah, thank you. Monica, you wanted the floor?
Yes. First, let me just make a little bit of a provocative comment on what you just said about innovation. I think that in some cases, the conversation about innovation, notably in energy efficiency, is a little bit of a way of distracting attention to what you can do right now and to really, push the can down the road, you say in English? And I think that that is a very important point to be made, because there are very many existing technologies for which there is not enough demand from one side, for which resources are there, but either you have problems in terms of regulations and bureaucratic hurdles, but also different layers of power, which is the same thing that is happening in many cases in renewables. That's the same thing also in energy efficiency. So I think that there is a real issue here to regulate and to implement the regulation so that the money that is there, because it's there, be it from public money or also readiness of private investment to come in, can actually be together. And I think that as far as the European Union is concerned, this is probably one of the issues for which a private-public partnership is really needed. And also, I would like to underline the fact that still talking about energy efficiency is culturally something that is not seen, indeed, not only as an easy solution, but as an immediate solution. And today, for example, in the European Union, there is this, and in many countries, there is this conversation about how we have to get rid of Russian gas, but the immediate, reflex of many policymakers is basically, let's go around and look for gas all over in the world, even if this is not quicker than to implement some measures. And we have been doing, for example, some study together with using EIA, European Commission, but also some of our companies' calculations, and we have seen, we have really made a paper about that, by changing the valves, by putting double glazing, by, you can really quantify how many billions of cubic meter of gas, in this case, you can spare. And I think that we can really ask industry together with think tanks, but also financial institutions, to work on this, because people do not want to see it. And I think that that is really a question of narrative and a question of approach that is probably even more important, at least in this continent, than discussing about innovation. Both things, of course, have to go in the same direction, but even the EIA shows very clearly that by using current technologies you can do a lot, so you can imagine how much you can do with new ones. And a very small point I just wanted to make, and that is that through the legislation that the Parliament and his excellent rapporteur is trying to do, we also need to convince member states that these things are working. And I'm very worried that there are a lot of at least 12 or 13 member states which are now asking to reduce even more the targets, the commitments, and even the investment. And this is really something that is dangerous for all of us. So I really think that this dialogue of what Lars was talking about and what you are advocating is really important, even in the moment in which we are defining the European legislation and the way in which the money is going. And because of that, and I finish, I think that the organization of events like this, where you put energy efficiencies in focus, are really important. And if you allow me, Connie, I just wanted to say that we are trying to organize an Energy Efficiency Day, which is a new thing in Brussels, on the 13th of October, to which, of course, you are all invited.
Thank you very much, Monica. Niels Fuglsang, you, of course, nodded when Monica says, basically, there are lots of solutions out there. But the demand side to pull the solutions and to scale them, that is maybe where one of the big problems are. And you mentioned in your first intervention that you are working with, in the directive, in the context of the directive, on new energy efficiency partnerships. Maybe now you could explain a bit, what is the thinking behind that? What is it you want to achieve?
Well, we know that there are so many good cases out there, and some of them were mentioned in the panel here. And we want to share those ideas among industry so that we can inspire each other, but we also want to push policymakers in the national, in the different states, in the different member states of the European Union. I think what Monica mentioned, that you have a number of member states actually going against higher ambitions now. They've drafted a common letter because they think that it will harm industry if we have too high requirements. I think today and the last days at this conference shows that that's not the correct picture of industry. That's not the correct picture of business. There's strong business interests in having higher targets, higher ambition level when it comes to energy efficiency, because it will create a lot of jobs. It will also make us more competitive, and this is the direction we need to go in. There's no conflict between having a good economic development, growth, jobs, and energy efficiency, and that is also one of the purposes regarding the climate partnerships, to have that dialogue and to show policymakers also, well, there are industry that actually don't want lower targets but want more ambition. And I think that dialogue is necessary, because way too often, ideology in politics is, goes back to the old story about, industry doesn't want any ambitious action and legislation, and I think that is wrong, and I think that's a dialogue we need to develop in those partnerships as well.
How does this sound to you, Jürgen Fischer? Because you also mentioned that there is a lot of time-consuming sort of rules and bureaucracy, and yet at the same time you are also asking for, a stronger pull faster. How to balance these things?
That's a good question. I think it starts with a good dialogue, as Nils is saying, and these events help a lot to send a message to everybody. Very often my feeling is the knowledge is not there. So we have solutions, and we are only a component manufacturer in Danfoss, right? We are not producing heat pumps and define the solutions. And sometimes we have a saying in Germany, den Hund zum Jagen tragen, which means basically you teach the dog to hunt, right? In English, I think there is a similar one in Danish. So we have to explain the whole story to the different parties, even though our business interest at the end is, of course, making money with the products we are selling. That's also fair, right? I mean, we are not a philanthropic organization. We are a company. We have people we have to pay. We want to invest in the future. And I think for me, it's always, how far should I go in explaining how much should we invest in industry affairs, public affairs, being active in Brussels, elsewhere, versus doing our job. And I think we have found a good balance in Danfoss, but we also have heavily invested in our public affairs, industry affairs organization, because we believe it's super important, and that's a way of cooperation which should not be underestimated, Connie. And you know that very well, as you have been there.
Yes, but Christian Heine, then the challenge is still a lot of good things are happening. But I guess that everybody here would agree that not enough is happening. So somehow we have to crack the nut on how to scale up action. So what would your bit be to that?
I actually really like Niels' approach, because
you have to take your microphone a bit
think I really like Niels' approach, because I think we have, in the energy sector, we have a lot of legislation, lots of regulation. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary to add on another legislation on energy efficiency. I think what we need to do is to scale up, to ramp up energy efficiency and these public-private partnerships. We need to establish these networks of companies that are working in the same business area, and then sectoral, and they can exchange ideas as to how to put intention into action in the industry that they're involved with. And I think we have to kind of make funding available. I think it often state governments in Europe kind of put in kind of funding programs, and then they are obliged to go to Brussels because it's a state aid act. And it takes ages for those funding programs to actually put into practice in Denmark, in Germany, in France, and elsewhere. So to reduce all these bureaucratic hurdles that we have, also on planning permissions and other things, I guess we have a lot of bureaucracy that hinders in a way that we act fast, and we need to act fast.
But there I would like to ask the panel then, it has been mentioned several times now that things takes ages. And that is of course also because there is this tendency in the political domain you must avoid errors. It is dangerous if there are errors, and down in the bureaucratic systems it is dangerous if you commit an error. Is there something in the culture here that also needs to be changed slightly if we're going to accelerate real action?
Can I just on the issue of excess heat, right? You have a lot debate about the question of, is this excess heat unavoidable? You know, and this is what politicians then say, so we can't really put in funding programs to support the utilization of excess heat because it needs to be unavoidable. Now, how do you legally define the term unavoidable excess heat, unavoidable industrial waste heat? And that often hinders, because it's so bureaucratic to then put the appropriate funding programs around those issues, because they want to make sure that, you know, the kilowatt hour is not used, that the industry is producing heat for the district heating system, right, and have a business model on it. And those issues, I think we have to address, especially kind of when we want to ramp up and scale up these processes, we have to relax about it and don't put even more legislation and regulation on it.
But then Niels Fuglsang and Monica, who has tried to legislate, I guess that you would say that if you try to change the definitions, then there would be a lot of vested interests who do not like the way you change the definitions. So when you say it should be more lax, Niels, what do you say then?
I agree here with Christian that when it comes to waste heat, I think we had in many member states a problem that we have not regulated it the right way. We have overtaxed waste heat, for example, and I think things are changing also in Denmark here, but I think in many countries we know that we need to use this waste heat, and I think we have become aware about that. But things take time, and Connie, you've been a commissioner, so you know that the EU, it can take a little bit of time before we go from the idea to the legislation, and we don't have so much time right now. So I think the Commission's Repower EU plan is good in the sense that it has some short-term measures, and then it has some long-term measures. The file that I'm working on, the directive, is a long-term measure in the sense that we will be finished hopefully in the autumn, and then it will work the coming years. And that's the structural changes we need to make. But I think the Repower EU plan is also about behavioral changes from the consumers right now. The IEA proposed something similar, that consumers can already now turn down the heat a little bit, drive a little bit slower, and so on. And I think they have a 10-point plan for what we could do. That's difficult, of course, for the European Union to say to people, you know, you should drive slower or turn down the heat. We cannot say that as policymakers. So we also need voluntary action in the short term, and that is a challenge. I really hope that we will succeed, because we need that also to fight Putin and so on in the short term.
Yeah, Patty?
Well, I was thinking about this, the ingredients to success, and research and development is one, deployment funding is another, and regulations are the third. And so in California, the governor has proposed nearly $1 billion for building decarbonization grants for scale-up strategies. Those are going to require a public-private partnership, so again, money from the private industry to scale up. And regulations, and we pass building energy efficiency standards that, interestingly, from my perspective, are actually a lot of the costs of implementing energy efficiency measures are being borne by the rooftop solar that we're requiring on new buildings. That's actually paying for a lot of the energy efficiency technologies. And in our last round of building energy efficiency standards, the Builders Association supported the standards, which I found just extraordinary, that we've reached this point where the builders are also seeing this opportunity and agree that we need some form of standards. And usually in regulations, the business does not agree. So I think it's pretty profoundly transformational that we are seeing the builders recognize that standards they need standards, and they want flexibility within those standards to not have a prescriptive technological solution, but to have a standard that they can then use best practices and economics to determine how best to meet.
Plus a visible way of getting some of the investments back into the system, as far as I hear your system. Monica?
I just would like to underline, because it is an eternal discussion, as you, Connie, know, and you as well, whether we need more regulation or not. But first of all, not all regulation is the same. You have good one and you have bad one. So I think that that is very obvious, but is important. Because the problems that we have, the hurdles, is first, is very, very often, you know, the different layers, regional, local, national, etc. And what is the role of the European legislation is actually to make all these things from one side less necessary, because the European one is very clear and it gives very clear indications, very clear targets, and the fact that in energy efficiency we did not have binding target is not really irrelevant to say, well, we're lagging very much behind, there is no demand, there is very little motivation, so there is a problem also of regulation there, because regulation also orientates where the money goes. And it's not all people who believe in climate change or in climate change solution out there, and in this moment there is a real competition between solutions which, according to me, are not solutions, and those who actually can be positive for business, for economy, etc. So it is not all the same. That's why we need a regulation which is much stronger in energy efficiency and renewable, and which is also able to put the two things together. And also a very short point I wanted to do. I think that there is a real need of clarity also in the way in which you implement the different solutions and the different legislation, because this is also another problem at European level. The way in which I implement it in Italy or you implement it here is very different, and some of the instruments that were done, like in Italy we have this super bonus, you know, which is basically a tax reduction of tax bonus of 110%, and only this in buildings created 0.7 growth in GDP last year. So it is not all good, but regulation and finances do help a hell of a lot.
To get the incentives right. Jürgen Fischer, now it was mentioned by Niels and others, this excess heat thing. And I mean, just in Denmark, now we have heard so many things about how fantastic everything here is, but, you know, it took 15 years from we started to discuss that something should happen with the taxation of that until it started changing. So things are slow. And you said in the beginning, Jürgen, that the way you work in Danfoss, that is plan, do, and check. And that sounds, of course, an act. That sounds really nice, but you also mentioned Project Zero as sort of your best example. Sort of how does the culture of a company who says plan, do, and act, and then a municipality, a democratic institution where things, for many reasons, takes time, what is the secret sauce to make that cooperation work efficiently?
I think at the end it's individuals, it's a cooperation of people, it's a few people as always who are taking the lead, who are pushing, who are not giving in, who are there from the beginning to the end. There is nothing bad about a democratic institution, right? And a company is maybe a little bit less democratic, but we all know that dictatorial systems are also less stable long term. At least I hope so, like in Russia. They are. And if we can mix a little bit of professional company management, plan, do, check, act, with the democratic institutions in a city council or in a parliament, that would make a lot of sense in my opinion. And it has been said here before, the old paradigm of the bad industry only wants to make profit and the politicians want to be re-elected and the public wants to not to move. I think we have to come over that. We only have 10 years, more or less, to move. I have two big wishes, if I can say that here. Number one, regulation has to be the DIN norms and all these putting rules into tangible action takes too long, right? It takes typically 5 to 7 years until a new technology is ending up in a DIN norm. And all the public servants who are building a new university, Germany in Mannheim, for example, work with the norms which are from 10 years ago. So how can we change something in 10 years if we today work according to the technology from 10 years ago? I mean, this is a push I would like to give to the regulators to change that. I know it's not EU necessarily only. Number two, education. If we do not educate our peers in city councils, educate our young people. There is a super good example here in this program later today. If we do not train people what energy efficiency is, and that is a super interesting job to be in, we name it installer. Hey, it should be named green engineer, save the world engineer. Then we could attract many more people in all our companies. I guess all the people sitting here have problems and get especially diverse talents into their companies. This is for me absolutely crucial and important that we do it now, because if we go on educating our people in 10 years, how would we do the change? We have to do a huge speed-up campaign for everything needed to manage this change. I know I deviated from your question a bit.
No, it's fine, because we are coming to a close here, and I wondered, Christian, also if you should mention sort of, your wish or the most important obstacle to remove in order to scale up now the real cooperation and delivering the real results. What would that be?
Well, I think, we talked and addressed a couple of points already, right? We need to get the funding available for the companies. We kind of need to create these networks, kind of build up on cooperation. But I would want to come back to a point that Jürgen was just making. To decarbonize and to fully defossilize the city of Hamburg is a huge challenge. And that needs to actually, it needs quite a planning process, an integrated planning process. And you need to take all stakeholders on board. And for this integrated planning, you need to take the electricity grid and put the gas grid and the district heating grid and the hydrogen grid on top of one another in order to make the right decisions now. We already know what our energy sources are in 2040 and 2045. So, and to build the infrastructures accordingly, where do we need to enlarge the capacity in the low voltage system, the medium and the high voltage system? Where can we dispense of a gas infrastructure, because gas, also synthetic gas, will not play a role anymore. But there are certain areas of the city where we are going to have CHPs, where we have industrial usage, where a hydrogen grid will be necessary, and the district heating system. And all of these things need to be done now. And one obstacle, I really have to address this because I think it's such nonsense from Brussels. It is on the gas market package, where they say that a gas infrastructure provider or gas operator, infrastructure operator cannot run a hydrogen infrastructure. I just think I can't just believe this.
Monica, 20 seconds, the biggest obstacle or the most important thing to focus on right now?
That he has a major success, that the EED and the EPBD directive come out very, very strong, and that the people around here, notably the private sector, understand that they have to be a big part of the fight.
And Niels?
Yes. Education, I think Jürgen is right. I sleep pretty well, but if I ever have a nightmare, it's about that we don't have the skilled workforce to do this. We need, I agree with you, we need my work to be a success, but then we also need somebody to carry out the work. We cannot only agree on something on paper, we need to make it happen, and for that we need the skilled workforce. And I'm afraid we're not there right now, so we need member states to educate their workforces to do this.
And Patty, last bit for you.
I would say, well, our biggest obstacle in the state of California is that electricity prices are rising and that we want to plug into the grid. That's our most efficient solution for many of our challenges. And as electricity prices escalate, it's harder to make the economic case work.
Thank you very much. Very many sort of considerations about what needs to be done here towards the end. Very much focus on education and skills, which we all know is a huge thing, and there will be a huge competition on that kind of workforce, what they can do and not can do. For instance, in Europe, I think the same in the US for the years to come. I think the point on the integrated planning, the holistic approach, I think that goes through whatever we have been discussing here, that industry needs to know where are we heading, and it must be reliable. And then we also had some very strong bits for an updated way of regulating, because sometimes old definitions are actually, it sounds very boring, but it's actually quite an obstacle in daily life. So thank you very much to our panel up here. I know that you will move on with the program, and we will now give the floor to back to Anne in just a moment, but first I hope you will join me in applauding the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you, and not least you, Connie. Thank you very much for an excellent moderation. Now we are going to have a brief coffee break until 10 o'clock, and then we will have sector sessions in 2 rotations. And the building session will be on level 1. We are on level 0, level 1 to the right. Industry will be level 2, transportation level 3, and sector integration in the red box right above me. And we will see each other again here at 11:45 for lunch.
Sì.